All right. So thanks everybody for attending this. So this is meant for Swiss living abroad and also dual nationals, because you've got different rules and that can pertain to both of these cases, whether you're a Swiss living in a foreign country or a dual national living in that foreign country. So first, I'm going to talk mostly about my personal experience, and there's going to be a lot of like maybe about my personal experience, how I felt, but also the actual process and tips about the process. And then we've got actual legal information from the Swiss Army that they sent us regarding the more specific rules and laws and obligations regarding your service. So first, what I want to say is that I'm not here to convince you about serving, but I must say it was an amazing experience. As a caveat, it is a little bit harder as a Swiss abroad or dual national. There's a bit more steps to take, a bit more things to do. You're not in the normal funnel of serving. That would argue that makes it even more worth it and even more cool. So what is it like serving a country? There is a sense of pride. You feel like you've contributed to a country. You feel like you're something bigger than you. There's a sense of accomplishment. You did something difficult. You know, recruit school is not easy. And I think one of the biggest advantages is that there's a community. You're going to have a connection with every other Swiss person in Switzerland and abroad. There's always going to be something that connects you with another Swiss person next to you. I think that's a really, really cool thing. But also, these are like the typical things, that you would learn in a more military setting. So leadership skills, discipline and rigor, social skills. I mean, you're dealing with people in high pressure environments for months. And that I think enhances your social skills enormously. Of course, there's a physical challenge. And arguably one of the coolest things that you learn things that you're never going to be able to experience in civilian life, shooting guns, making explosives, riding on helicopters, learning survival skills. And that makes the experience so much more rewarding. So as Eugenia said, and I have a little correction. So yeah, I essentially never lived in Switzerland. I grew up in Hong Kong, and both my parents are French-speaking Swiss. So I do speak French fluently, but no German or no Italian. In 2018, after my high school, I did my Swiss military service, so in Switzerland. But then I left straight after. I was in 2019 in the UK, then in Germany, and then now I'm doing my PhD in Beijing, in China. So maybe a lot of you will be able to connect with the fact that you've never actually lived in Switzerland. Maybe you've gone on vacation there, you have parents there, grandparents, but never actually lived in that country. And that's also my case. And I'll tell you that that's not a barrier essentially to do your service if you want to. So this will be like a typical path. So for me, for example, in June 2016, so a year before I graduated, I had the first contact with my consulate about doing my my military service as a Swiss abroad. And a year later, I graduated high school. And then like 6 months later, I started my recruit school. This is an approximate timeline of around like a year and a half. But this is like actually pretty flexible. I'll explain why. So first, in a typical, as a normal Swiss living in Switzerland, the first step and the first contact you have with the military is the information day. So it's like a half-day information day that you spend in your canton, and they just give you the general information of the whole process of your military service. So this is not applicable to us because we're going to be abroad and we won't have this contact. Instead, we're going to have some paperwork. So this is where essentially, if you're interested, you get in contact with your nearest consulate or embassy, and they start the whole process, which at some point will lead you to Bern and to people in charge in Bern to organize your service. The main things that you're going to have to prove is, your birth certificate, your family information. Most important, your criminal record, especially if you've lived in multiple countries in your childhood. You're going to have to find a criminal record, I think, for the past 5 or 10 years of where you lived. Depending if you travel a lot, that might be a little bit complicated, but that's really important. And the language aptitude, which they don't test directly, but you will have to make sure that it's good enough in one of the 3 national languages. So yeah, I would say that ideally you would, start getting in contact with your consulate or your embassy like 1 or 2 years before the start of your ideal date for your recruit school. Yeah, and one thing is important is that depending on your country of residence and your dual nationality, the process might be a little bit longer or harder in certain cases for providing proof of citizenship, birth certificates, all these kind of things. I will talk about the exact legal requirements later, but that's something to take into account. Just making sure that like all military service from a Swiss abroad is voluntary. So there's no like obligations while you're living abroad. Whenever you're living abroad, all your military there's no military obligations when you're living abroad. Okay, that's important to note. Then recruitment days. This works for everybody, whether you're in Switzerland or a Swiss living abroad. There are usually 2 days in your own canton, so you stay overnight in the barracks. There's a sport test, psychological test, language test, medical. And the Swiss abroad is slightly different. Usually they find recruitment days just before the start of your recruit school. So you don't have to come, people usually do their recruitment days, and that might start their recruit school 6 months, a year, even 2 years after they've done their recruitment days in Switzerland. But as a Swiss abroad, usually they find a way for you to do your recruits days right before the start of your recruit school, so you don't have to come that much in advance to Switzerland. This is a little bit of the only problem with this is that sometimes it limits your choice of functions, because you might come a few days before the start of recruit school, and maybe certain functions or certain places are already booked, or there's no more space for you. So that's one thing to take into account, and that you can talk with your consulate about, that they might have a little bit more information about when's a good time to do your recruitment days based on what kind of function you might be interested in. All right, functions. Of course, it's like, many all types of functions, anything from like combat functions to, a lot of assistance and all types. And you can find on the internet exactly what they are. But one thing to take into account is when you go to the recruitment day, that's the only time that they're going to tell you what function you can take, or what function you will be assigned. It's not you can take. They will assign you a function, but they will take into account your personal preference, so you can tell what you prefer, your results on the sports test, because some functions are limited and some aren't. Also, the needs of the army, whether they really need specific functions or there's no more space. And the language is one thing to take into account. For example, if the barracks of that function are far away from where you live, or they're mostly German speaking. But in my opinion, that's not as important, because in the army, essentially, it's bi and trilingual in many, many places. But that's one thing, important thing, is that you can have a preference, but in the end, they will choose a function for you. There's a few special situations. One is cooks. They always need cooks. So if you have some kind of like professional cooking certificate or experience, a lot of times they will really force you to do, because they're always in need of cooks. When you have accountancy skills, you're a medical student, or you have very special skills, they really encourage you to do something that's related, because they also need those. Then you've got things like mountain specialist, which is selected because of the skills, and you need to know very well, mountain climbing, very good skiing, and all that. Then, for example, functions which are called special forces or grenadiers. These are very selective, and they're mostly sports and psychological tests. And then finally, the hardest thing to get into is essentially the parachutist, because you have to, at 16 years old, you already have to do these special courses, which are called sphere, that give you a civil parachuting license. This is a very special situation. But in general, if you're going to go to the recruitment days, think about what you're most interested in, the skills you want to learn, where it is, or where's the location compared to where you're going to live, and of course the language of that barrack. But I would just encourage you to think that this is quite special situation to do something you might never do in civilian life. So even if you do have a skill that you think might, let's say you're a medical student and you also want to do that in the army, that's fine. But you can also think that you could do something totally, totally different that you're never going to do again. That's what I would encourage you to think about. All right, then you've got things like the aptitude test for the special forces, or other very specialist or selective roles. So for example, for the mountain specialist also. So you're going to, in my case, for example, that's what I did. So we went 2 extra days in the barracks, and there's harder sports test, there's stress test, they test your motivation. And as a Swiss abroad, you can actually do this. Even though there's 2 extra days, they will essentially, your first week of your recruit school will be those aptitude tests, in case you want to join these more selected units, specifically the grenadiers. And yeah, if you fail, no worries, you're just going to reassign to another function, let's say infantry or something close to it. Cool. But now this is, let's say, a common process for whether you're a Swiss abroad or not. Now you're a Swiss abroad, you've essentially integrated the army, you're doing your military service, and this is the process for every single person. There's no separation now between a Swiss living in Switzerland or a Swiss living abroad. Everybody has the same status. Nobody even knows you're a Swiss from abroad. So in my case, I did the Grenadiers, so it's slightly different than most army functions because it's also voluntary, because it's a bit harder to do. In their case, they want to filter out people because it's supposed to be selective. So they really try to push you out of your limits. And so not all functions are like that. Other functions are a bit more normal. They will still stress test you. It might be stressful, it might be hard, but their goal is not as much as to select people out, which was more of that in our case. So in basic training, what's common for everybody, whatever the function is, you know all the formal greetings, all the formal marching, basic gun skills, shooting it, cleaning, which takes a long time, grenades, like all the basic warfare, basic outdoor survival. That's what you're going to learn, what they call like basic training. The first, I think, 8 weeks of your recruit school. Then most schools will have some kind of like specialization phase. So this is when you're officially promoted to soldier. So now you're not on the last rung of the ladder. Your daily pay goes up like 1 franc per day, which is great. And this is where, like in our case, for example, we specialize whether you're doing explosive, machine gun, let's say sniper, all these kind of things. So different functions will have different specializations. This was what I did essentially. So yeah, I was an explosive, I see on the bottom right. So I exploded things. Okay, then the last part of the recruit school is what they call like section or battalion training. So this is, the point is to integrate all the things you've learned as a soldier, as a small group, into larger and larger groups. So here you're training with more groups, more people, more units. This of course requires a lot of coordination and combines everything you've learned before. And to be honest, it actually trains the officers more than the soldiers because there's all the coordination and more like war planning type of things. So in our case, this is an example for the Grenadiers of how the groups are organized. So what we call a group is like 4 to 10 people and usually led by a sergeant. They've got sections, which has like 20 to 30 people, to 4 to 5 sergeants. And then a company, it's like 60 to 90 people, usually led by a captain. And then a battalion, which is much bigger, and this led by a major. Okay, then really the end of your recruit school is going to be your family day. This is the time where you can show off your skills, make everybody, make your parents proud, and it's to be honest, really fun because you've got lots of visitors seeing where you're up to. I would say it's like a high stress day because you want to improve, but it's a low stress day because you know exactly what you're going to be doing. So I think it's a really cool time. Then what a lot of people wonder a lot when they do the army is that there's this whole myth about, oh, the army will force you to grader, or like to promote, go to officer school. So first of all, in general, early on, the officers will try to detect who has potential to be promoted, and they're going to kind of like encourage them to get more leadership roles, see how they react under pressure, see if they're interested. So actually, from the very start, they're going to have a look at, okay, who could have a good potential. So promotion usually means extra 6 months if you want to be a sergeant, and an extra 12 months if you want to become lieutenant. This kind of depends on your function. And it also means that your VK, your repetition courses, will be slightly longer because of that. And in general, they will usually not force you to promote. Of course, there are exceptions, but these days, at least, I've nearly never heard of people who actually get forced to promote. Of course, they will try to encourage you, try to convince you, but it's really not their interest to have people that are not motivated or don't want to be there. So I've really never heard of people getting really, forced to sign the paper like maybe it used to be. Okay, then repetition courses. So you've done your recruit school. Now you're going to be assigned to your battalion usually, or your unit, kind of depends on your function. So this is the general rules that you have like 6 times 3 weeks of VK, and you have to do them before the age of 34. You can expedite the process. For example, you can do what we call like a guest VK. So you go to another battalion in the same year, for example. So you do 2 repetition courses per year, and you can do them faster. That's also possible. Or you can also do like lots of extra days before and after a VK, because they always need people to help out. So that's one important thing as Swiss abroad, is that if you do leave Switzerland, you will have to pay for the remaining days of service that you haven't served. Essentially, when you get in the whole funnel of the military service, then you have to complete your days. If you don't complete your days, that means they're not finished, and you have to pay some kind of tax, some kind of compensation for it. That's important. One thing that we'll talk about after, is doing the long service. So, and that's like a very privileged choice that a Swiss abroad would take to do what they call long service, which means doing your recruit school and your VK in one go, essentially. So, money. In general, and this was in my time, and maybe it has changed, but usually as a student, or if you don't have a job, you get around 1,400 francs a month during recruit school, around. If you're already working, because you got a lot of people who do apprenticeships in Switzerland, so they already have a job. So the army covers 80% of your salary. And I have a lot of friends and people that I know that oftentimes the employers would pay the remaining 100%. And then, as you know, of course, you have practically no cost during your military time, mostly just food that you're going to buy extra or on the weekends. And that's about it. Linked to money is the taxes and the alternatives. So as I said before, once you start, you voluntarily assumed your military obligations. So as a Swiss abroad, which you didn't have to, but you did, or even as a woman, whether you're in Switzerland or outside of Switzerland, the rules are going to be the same for everyone. Which means that if you don't finish your days on time before the age of 34, you have to pay some kind of tax. If you return abroad with days left from doing your military service, you've got to pay some kind of tax. And one thing is that if you return to Switzerland after the recruiting age, so after 25, and you've never done your military service, you're going to also have to pay some kind of tax. Or if you live in Switzerland officially. Also, as a Swiss abroad, civil service is technically possible, but to be honest, never heard of it. Usually it's for people who don't really want to do the military service. So that's one possibility, but then it's also much longer than the military service. Also with the recent referendum as well, it makes civil service less and less attractive. And as I said, the long service is quite a popular option for the Swiss abroad, but the functions are slightly more limited. That's one thing to take into account. But it is, I would say, like the best option as a Swiss abroad, because you can do all your days in one go. Okay, now there's also like kind of like after military life. So if you fell in love with the army, I have a lot of friends who, I would say a lot, but who did things that were, let's say, related to the army. So I one or two went to do the Swiss Guard of the Pope. This is, of course, only Swiss men that can assume this function. In general, in police and security, the army experience would be really valued. I have friends who are at university, they were like doing like security part-time jobs on the weekend, and their army experience really helped them get the job. And then, of course, you can integrate the army professionally. So there's the real special forces, like the professional special forces called the DA-10 and the NP-Schwetzdet. You can become a career military man, or a woman, become a high-ranking official in the military. So this is either more like wargaming and organizing, actual like high-level tactics of how to organize the army and warfare. Whether you have specialized skills, whether it's chemical warfare or like a chemical background, like in chemistry, for example, that you could help. And the higher you go up, of course, the more politics is involved, of course. And then there's the third option, which is like relatively new in the past, I think, decades, is what they call like contractors. So technically you're employed by the army, but it's a more flexible and it's a temporary kind of job. So you can be like a contractor sergeant, contractor lieutenant to help with the recruit schools that don't have enough people, for example. And this is kind of cool because you get to work a bit more in the army, but they don't have to make a career out of it. And then it's some kind of specialist roles that you're looking for. Okay, now a little bit about my personal experience. So I would say maybe people that live abroad and they're a bit scared of like not fitting in or feeling like, oh, there'll be a little difference. I mean, okay, like case in point, I maybe look like a very like typical Swiss, blonde and white skinned. So I would say that it's my own experience, but in general, I would say there's not much discrimination, and the culture shock is not as bad as I would have thought. I think, to be honest, just knowing one of the national languages is really so important. The rest, people are really, essentially, people are looking for friends, they're looking for connection, they're looking for people they can trust. So people are super open actually to connecting. So I think one thing I've never felt, left out or anything. Even though I had never lived in Switzerland, I had no, cultural references that people had, but it was never a problem. What I found is that, majority of people are responsible and mature. So one thing is that I was 18, but most people would be around 20, 21, some were even 24. Some had done uni before, some were working already for a few years. So I think that was a really cool experience to grow as well, because you're around people that are slightly, I would say, more responsible and more mature. I would say you learn a lot from your officers, which are also very young. Some officers were my age, or maybe not my age, like 2 years older. But they had grown a lot through their training, which was great. And yeah, as I said, it's hard, but I really loved it. I think it's totally worth it. I had lessons, memories. And I still have friends that I see every year when I go back to Switzerland. And yeah, it is a sense of pride for sure, having done it. And I said, you meet Swiss from all walks of life. A few little tips for the procedure is that, add everything to it in advance. You have to think about where to stay during the weekends. That's the main thing. If you don't have like close family that you can stay in Switzerland. One thing that the organization of Swiss Abroad can organize is to find host families for you during the weekends. So that's one option. In general, if you can, email and call the offices. They're actually super helpful. You're not staying in waiting lines for too long. They actually will help you. In my case, since I wanted to do the Grenadiers, I needed some help to get the right dates of the aptitude test and the right dates for the recruit school, and they were very tight. And to be honest, while I just called them, I asked them to tell me, and they really made things work. So they were super helpful. And yeah, one thing is really come to the recruitment days knowing exactly what you want and what you need for your function. Like do the research, look on the internet, like on the Army's website to know what you want. Because the worst thing to do is to come there and to not really know what's going on and what, and then you get assigned whatever the Army wants you in or needs you in without you having any kind of say. And my personal tip is that I would choose the hardest or the most selected units, whether it's the Grenadiers or maybe even mountain specialist or other things that are more selective based on skills or based on something, because you end up with people that are actually motivated and want to be there. So even like, for example, the mountain specialist, they're very selective in terms of skills. So you've got lots of people that are like so passionate about mountain. They're mountain people essentially, and they really want to be there. They're really enjoying their time. You really want to avoid being in places where people are kind of forced to be there and they don't want to do their RS, while you like moved from abroad specifically just to do your RS, and then you end up with some young people that don't really want to be there. Which is why I think the best way to avoid that is to find a function that's quite specialized, whether it's the medical, even like medics, for example. You've got a lot of medical students and people working in those fields which actually like what they do. So yeah. For the recruit school in general, I would say, like, I know it's far away for anybody that's thinking of it, but just be open-minded. You want to prepare yourself physically. Most of it is running with a backpack, like rocking, bodyweight exercises, basic weights, nothing fancy. In general, respect hierarchy. You want to like play the game, and yeah, that's just what I would say. Like, don't try to be smarter than everybody else. Be ready to push stuff. Don't be egoistical or selfish. It will bite back. Like, people will realize, officers will realize, your peers will realize, and it's a really bad situation to be. So I say, really don't be selfish. And in general, especially when it's hard times, you can remember how lucky you are to learn things you can never do. Like, we've touched like equipment that was, super specialized and things that we would never ever find anywhere in normal life. You make amazing friends. You also travel Switzerland to amazing, hidden places, like the most random bunkers that nobody has ever been into. And yeah, you contribute to your country, which is, as I said, still a sense of pride. So this is the first part. So this is my experience and what I went through. Now I'm going to go a little bit over the actual rules that the Army sent us. about it, and I'm just going to focus on a few key rules. So he gave us quite a few things, but I'm going to focus first this. So as they say in law, every Swiss man in Switzerland is required to perform military service. So Swiss women abroad, it's only voluntary. Swiss men abroad is also only voluntary. And as a dual national is what they call based on the initial service principle, which we're going to talk about later. So first, as a Swiss abroad, let's say you only hold one nationality and you're living abroad. So yeah, apparently in 2025, there was more than 100 people that went to recruitment days. And I think 92 were actually started the recruit school. What's important for the recruitment requirements for the Swiss abroad? It's actually quite simple. You need to fill out the form that you're going to find at your local embassy consulate, and what they call this security check. This is where your criminal record for the past X amount of years, which I forgot, is very important. Just like in Switzerland, you can do this as long as you're under 24. So between 18 and 24, you can do recruit school. You cannot do that after when you turn 25. So this essentially, request you essentially first get in contact with your consulate and your embassy, and they will essentially lead you to the correct person to talk to. This is very important, sufficient knowledge of a Swiss national language. This may be a good point to talk about like how the languages work in the military. And I would say it's very fluid. It really depends on a lot of things, where the barracks are, what's the majority speaking, population in your unit, whether it's your officers or your peers. But I would say that in general, Swiss people are quite good at languages. They always know relatively well a second language, or somebody does. So for example, me, I was in a Swiss Italian like in Ticino, where they speak Italian. I didn't speak any German or Italian. I spoke only French fluently. And I had no problem. There was always people around me helping me out, some people translating. There were quite a few French-speaking Swiss, but majority were German speakers. I didn't have any problem at all. So in general, I would say like things are very fluid, and technically everything should be translated, which in practice it isn't. But that's why I said before that choosing your function based on the location, I don't think is the best choice, just because in the end, the function will matter more than who speaks around you, because you're gonna connect with everybody anyways. Okay, and yeah, this is important as you can't have completed military service in another country, of course. And this is for the dual nationals. The applicant cannot possess the nationality of their country of residence. So let's say you're a dual national and you're living in the second country, not in Switzerland, then officially you're not allowed to be doing your military service in Switzerland. But there are some exceptions to it that we're going to talk about after. Yeah, the one supports, pay for travel expense, which is nice. The OSA helps you out, mostly with financial help, but also with the host family. And that's quite important for those maybe that don't have like direct family in Switzerland. And yeah, soldier laundry, which is very important. Okay, dual nationals. So as I said, if you have done your military service in another country, you cannot do, and you're not liable to the Swiss military service or obligations. But you still have to pay some kind of exemption tax if you live in Switzerland. So this is what they call the residence principle. So persons with dual nationality perform their service in the state where they reside. But there's going to be bilateral exceptions, and they only exist with 7 countries. So we've got this works for Germany, France, Italy, and Austria. So they can choose which country they can do their military service in. That's the main thing. The thing is, apparently the rule for France is planned to change, that there's not going to be an exemption for this. So we have to, like, if you're dual national Swiss French, I would say just keep track of like what the rules are, as they're going to change very soon. Then there's Colombia, Argentina, US, who have also have like bilateral agreements. Yeah, okay. This is just some legal information from the army. Just keep your stuff updated. And there's a special case for Singapore. And yeah, these are the contact emails and telephones of the person I contacted actually in 2016, Mr. Grunig, in Bern. And those two have been like super helpful to me as well. So if you have any specific questions, you'll always be able to contact them, as well as your local embassy or consulate. But actually, they could be your first point of contact if you're ever interested in making things go forward for doing your military service. Right. So that's it on my part. So thanks for coming, and I'm open to any kind of questions, any concerns. I'm happy to answer those.
Otherwise, I do see some questions on. Yeah, go ahead, Carlos.
No, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. Thank you.
All right. Otherwise, I do see a few. Somebody asked here, how are women involved in the Swiss military service?
Yeah, so women have kind of like the same status as the Swiss abroad, as in they don't have any military obligations, but they can volunteer for it. Whether you're a woman living in Switzerland or a woman living abroad, you can volunteer for your service, and practically everything that I said here as it's abroad essentially applies to a woman, and they can volunteer for the service. And then afterwards, as I said before, once you volunteer and you've assumed your military obligations, then you're liable to all these taxes and days that you essentially committed to doing. So actually, as a Swiss abroad and a woman, in a way, it's a very same process because you're voluntarily doing your service.
We also have another question. So somebody said, if I go register to my Gemeinde, when do I receive my military application?
Yeah, so that's only if you officially move back to Switzerland. So if you move back to Switzerland, let's say when you're 20, so in the middle of your recruiting age, you will register at your local council and then local commune, and straight away you'll be in the funnel of the whole military recruitment. So you're going to be sent information about the information day, the recruitment days, the recruit school, and will be done relatively quickly. So that will be done automatically. But if you're a Swiss abroad, then that's different. That's when you start contacting the people in Bern or your embassy to start the process.
Another question we had is, what are the exceptions or options for professional athletes? Are they exempt?
Okay. That's interesting. Actually, I remember hearing a stat about this, like I think it was in 2010, of the 23 Swiss national players in the football team. I think only 6 did their military service. And majority of them were considered, even Roger Federer actually got exempt from military service. So how they do that, essentially, the easiest way to get exempt is to have some kind of injury or physical inaptitude, which they are trying to make it harder to do. But that's the main way physical professional athletes will let's say avoid doing their recruit school, because the problem is it's very hard to combine both if you're being a professional athlete. But there's something which is quite interesting, which is called what they call the elite sport RS. So these are technically for elite athletes, and it's a very special recruit school that happens once a year for your sport. But you have to be a very high level athlete in your federation, and your federation has to make a request to the army for you to say that this person is a high level athlete in our sport, and we want him to do this special sport RS so that this person can combine their professional sport with the military. And this is the famous center in Macolin where they do that. So it is possible, but you have to be quite a high level athlete for that. Yeah.
Another question we had is, when you want to do your military service and do that 300-day option, when do you get to decide that?
So this usually, you would usually decide this at the recruitment days. So recruitment days is when they decide what function and where you're going. That's the official part. But especially as Swiss abroad, that's when you're going to be talking to Mr. Grunig or people in Bern. When you're doing the whole process, you can tell them that you're interested in this, and they will also be able to tell you what kind of functions you accept that, and also, you know, what are like good dates for this, because not all recruit schools start at this have, you know, multiple intakes a year. They might only have one intake per year, and they might know that some recruit schools are always open or some are quickly booked, like have full capacity. So officially on the recruitment days, unofficially from the start, you want to tell the person you're talking to that you're interested in that, and that they can help you as much as possible to make it possible.
And the last question here, can I do my military service on a specific region?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I mentioned before. It's one of the things they will take into account when they assign you a function. That's something that you can, if you feel strongly about, you can voice. So you can, whether it's because it's location-wise, it's close to where you're going to be staying, or it's just because it's in your linguistic region, so you feel more comfortable. That is definitely something you can take into account. Yes, but as I said before, I think that language in the army is like the smallest issue, at least in my experience. And I am a person who like didn't speak a word of German, and I had most like all Germans around me, and it was, I would say it was never a problem, but it was a very minor problem, and in the end, it was more fun than anything else. And so I would optimize more for function and for interest more than for location. That would be my tip.